On Veiled Histories, we pull back the curtain on the stories that have been deliberately buried, and today we're looking at a genocide so shocking it literally provided a blueprint for one of the greatest horrors in human history. Just listen to these words: an order for total, absolute annihilation. A declaration that every single man, woman, and child of a specific group of people must be exterminated. When you hear something like that, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? You're probably thinking of the Holocaust, right? The industrial-scale horror of World War II. I mean, it should sound like that. But here's the thing. This order was given decades earlier, and on a completely different continent. Nope, this was German Southwest Africa, what we now call Namibia. And the year? 1904. You heard that right. Decades before Hitler ever came to power, the language, the methods, and the ideology of genocide were already being tested and perfected. This is the story of Germany's forgotten genocide. And it's not just a horrific tragedy in its own right. It's a terrifying dress rehearsal, a blueprint for the evil that was still to come.
So the big question is, how? How could something like this happen in the deserts of southern Africa? And how did it lay the groundwork for one of history's most monstrous events? Let's dig in.
To really get our heads around the how, we've got to understand the why. And it all starts with a particular way of looking at other people, a mindset we could call the genocidal gaze. Now, this isn't just, simple prejudice. This is on another level entirely. It's a worldview that says another group of people are so subhuman, they're basically vermin, that you have a license, a right to wipe them off the face of the earth. In the eyes of the German colonizers, the indigenous Herero and Nama people weren't human beings. They were just obstacles. And this didn't just happen out of nowhere. This poison festered for decades. It starts back in 1885, when Germany sets up what they called a protectorate. But what that really meant was using shady, deceptive treaties to steal the best land, the best water sources, from the people who had lived there forever. So when the rebellion finally happened in 1904, it wasn't some random act of aggression. It was a people pushed to the absolute brink, fighting back after decades of being robbed and brutalized.
And the brutality, it's hard to even comprehend. We're talking about the systematic theft of land and cattle, the very lifeblood of these communities. We're talking about vicious floggings, so common that one Herero leader said they came more regularly than their meals. The rape of indigenous women was just rampant. And the so-called justice system, it was a complete joke. You needed 7 African witnesses to even equal the word of one German. Even the German governor at the time admitted that the settlers believed their white skin gives the right to perpetrate the most revolting crimes. They knew what was happening.
So, the Herero and Nama people finally had enough. They fought back. And Germany's response? They didn't just send a soldier to end a rebellion. They sent an exterminator. His name was General Lothar von Trotha, and he showed up with one thing on his mind. He wasn't there to negotiate. He wasn't there to make peace. He saw it all in one simple, horrifying way. In his own words, this uprising is and remains the beginning of a racial war. And that twisted worldview led directly to his infamous Vernichtungsbefehl, which literally means extermination order. After a major battle, the goal completely shifted. It was no longer about winning a war. It was about making sure not a single Herero man, woman, or child survived. This was now official German policy: annihilation. What happened next was a cold, systematic campaign of murder. And the methods they used are going to sound chillingly familiar. Step 1, they drive thousands of people, entire families, into the bone-dry Oaxaca desert. Step 2, they seal off the desert and poison the few water holes that exist. The goal was simple and sadistic: death by thirst. And for the few who somehow survived that, Step 3, they were rounded up and sent to what the Germans themselves called Konzentrationslager, concentration camps. And yes, they used that exact term. In camps like the hellish Shark Island, people were systematically starved, worked to death, and just left to rot from disease. An eyewitness at the time, Fred Cornell, described seeing prisoners in heavy manacles on legs and arms, never taken off till they knocked them off when they died. Just let that sink in. These weren't prisons. They were death factories. And here's the craziest part. For over 100 years, this whole story was just buried, intentionally ignored, actively denied. Here at Veiled Histories, our whole reason for existing is to drag these stories out of the shadows.
because you have to understand the past if you want to have any hope of protecting the future. If you believe in that mission as much as we do, please help us keep going by subscribing and hitting that bell icon. It truly makes a difference.
So what was the end result of all this? What was the final human toll? By 1908, 80%. 80% of the entire Herero population was gone.
It's almost impossible to wrap your head around a number like that. When you break it down, it's just staggering. About 65,000 Herero people, 80% of them, wiped out. The Nama people, who also fought back, lost half their population, about 10,000 people. These aren't just numbers on a chart. This was the near total destruction of entire peoples, entire cultures. A crime this huge, with parallels this obvious to a later, much more famous genocide. It just begs the question, right? Why the silence? How was this forgotten?
Well, this is really the core of it all. The parallels aren't just a coincidence. They're a direct line. The ideology, a racial war. The method, concentration camps. The orders, explicit extermination orders. They even had the disgusting pseudoscience down. Skulls of murdered prisoners were packed up and shipped to Germany for eugenic research, a direct dress rehearsal for the kind of scientific experiments the Nazis would later conduct. The blueprint is right there. It's undeniable.
But for a century, Germany's official response was denial. That deafening silence was only broken recently. It wasn't until 2021, that the German government finally, formally, recognized these events as a genocide and started the very long, very difficult talk about reparations. For the descendants of the victims, the fight for justice is far from over.
And that leaves us with one final haunting thought. This story wasn't just forgotten by accident. It was actively pushed into the dark. So you have to ask yourself, when we let history get buried like this, what other horrors are being planned right now in the shadows? What is the real price of forgetting?